Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode number 225 for July 28th, 2021. My name is Jason Neifer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the fabulous University of Montana campus right here in Missoula, Montana. And joining me, as always, good evening, Dr. Wes Fryer. How are you tonight?
Good evening, Jason. I am well, and I am enjoying this last week of summer vacation before I head back to school. Our kids will come back in about 3 weeks, I guess, on the 18th, but be back to get back in the saddle again. And it's been good. So I've been working on updating my website and trying to make things less complicated and taking out incriminating things that say you haven't updated your website in a long time, like a Google Plus link. That was like, oh, that's really nice. Nothing says relevant like connect to me on Google Plus.
It's funny because I actually looked a couple weeks ago at, I had run into an archive of my old blog, and I had written an extensive blog post about Google Plus and said that this technology is interesting, but it's too little too late to beat Facebook, and the only thing that would survive from this is Google Hangouts. As it turns out, I was a prophet. I was correct in that Google really wouldn't make a lot of play in the social media space, but Google Hangouts will be a big deal. And considering that's the intellectual predecessor to Google Meets, I have to say that I seem to pick up on that, and it's certainly a daily part of my life as a Google virtual administrator.
I'm honestly glad Google Plus died. Not that we're going to go down a rabbit hole with this, but anyway, quick thought. When it set up, I was just like, oh, great. Here's another place that I'm going to have to post and share stuff. Anyway, and it's interesting how that all goes in waves. Well, what are we going to actually talk about besides Google Plus tonight, Dr. Neifer? I heard a rumor that this was like the weather and food show.
Weather and food show could be. I mean, we could certainly talk about that for the hour, but we have other topics to talk about tonight, including media literacy, privacy, Apple, Microsoft, Google News, social media, some food for thought for me, and this will be a little bit down a rabbit hole, a little bit of information from Wes about upcoming PD, and of course our Geeks of the Week. And what we like to do here at the EdTech Situation Room is take a look at headlines from across the technology sphere, kind of shoot it through the prism of education and maybe how some of the micro and macro trends in technology might impact classrooms, all the way from tech directors down to individual classroom teachers. Wes, you did the bulk of the work tonight on links. Is there a particular place you'd like to start tonight?
Oh, let's see. Why don't we talk a little bit about just Google? Let's start there. Several different headlines. So I put this one, and actually our daughter is continuing our middle daughter to do some nannying, and she mentioned that one of the kids she's nannying has all this bad spam with Google Calendar on her iPad. Anyway, she was helping her take that off, and that's related to this article. So Ars Technica on July 23rd said Google is finally doing something about Google Drive spam, and that can also sometimes, I guess, manifest itself in Calendar and other places. But there's a basic, I guess, set of tools 2 years after Google had officially acknowledged this program to try to address this. And Gmail's got great spam controls, but this is talking about Drive. Anyway, so maybe this isn't saying this is in Calendar, but I don't know. I haven't been plagued by this a lot, but evidently, there are folks that have been facing it. So is this an issue that you've seen or heard about or experienced yourself, Dr. Knight?
I've heard about it before, but just like now, in fact, I went to go look right now in my shared with me folder in Google Drive, and I don't recognize all this stuff, but what I would say is that it seems fairly likely that a lot of this was old things I clicked on that were publicly shared, and then it ends up on the your shared with you folder. But I mean, some of this stuff is old, like going back to 2007, 2008. And when it was just Google Docs that people were sharing with each other. But yeah, it's never been a problem for me, but I have talked to and seen over the shoulder other individuals that said that it was a pretty big deal for them. It was a bad deal. So I guess I'm not surprised from the standpoint that others are experiencing issues.
So several other Google-related articles. This is TechCrunch on July 20th. Google is letting viewers tip their creators. And I've mentioned it on the show before how one of the more valuable and surprising things I did last year with my students, and I'm going to do it again, is just kind of get a sense of, some of their favorite YouTubers and who they're watching and listening to. And so it's always a moving, target as far as, not only what social media students are using, but, who they're listening to. And I don't know, maybe I'll do a survey this year to get a little bit of a sense, because I think at least half my kids are really watching YouTube a lot. So anyway, that's probably not going to be impacting us here at the EdTech Situation Room, since we've not set up any kind of monetization. I don't know if you have to have a certain level of subscribers or something like that. I think you probably do, because in order to monetize your channel, you have to have over 1,000 subscribers, and then you have to have X number of views in the past 3 months or year or something like that. Which, interestingly, on my personal channel, I actually crossed that threshold, I don't know, about a few months ago, but that won't be affecting us, so we won't be cashing in. However, you're closely tied to some YouTube quilting fame, are you not?
Yeah, crafting fame.
Crafting fame.
The Gail Augustinelli channel on YouTube just hit 50,000 subscribers a couple of weeks ago, and she posts videos. I think it's daily, not weekdays, but daily. And I will say, knowing a little bit about, she has her son Mike, who's a close friend and a colleague of mine at the Digital Academy, and between all of her ventures that are related to it, it's definitely compensation that would be for a full-time job. One of the things that I think is super interesting, because I have really mixed feelings about the notion of creators, because I do hear a lot of kids saying they want to be YouTube creators or creators as a job, and in a lot of cases it just doesn't happen, right? Like I've had students in the last they would have been students from now 11 years ago now, when I was still in the high school classroom, that were kind of creators-ish, and they ended up somewhere in the industry, but not in the kind of self-published creator space, working for TV stations or becoming videographers or video editors or graphic designers, or I've had several students have become graphic designers. But what's interesting to me is that, yes, it's not a guarantee, right? Not all creators make enough money to have that as a full-time gig, but at the same time, a lot do. And as a matter of fact, if you can find unique niche, and you can share unique stories or find an audience, it is very possible to monetize in a way between, it very rarely comes from one source for the middle or small time creators, but between YouTube ad revenue and perhaps merch, or if you have Amazon affiliate links or advertisers that advertise with you, which is not that hard to pick up once you get, some baseline popularity. It is very possible. And that's a very different thing from, obviously the media landscape 20 or 30 years ago. I still remain infinitely impressed with the variety of YouTube channels that, I certainly know and believe that YouTube has problems when it comes to, creating political issues, when it comes to radicalizing people that are looking at political or perhaps philosophical videos, if you will, on the YouTubes. But it's still probably my primary channel of information entertainment, and I love it. And there's probably 20 or 30 creators, many of which I actually fund via Patreon, that provide me both, kind of infotainment and entertainment. And it's still at awe by that.
Absolutely. You put a couple other Google-related articles in there. Do you want to pick the one up about Classroom and then the Chrome OS?
Last week, Google announced that that they're continuing to adapt Google Classroom, and they're adding, they're starting to add things that are making it a pretty legit learning management system. And in fact, in the blog post itself, and this comes from Oscar Sharma, who is the product manager for Google Classroom, and the blog post talks about, they are literally calling it a learning management system now. And that was a term that I think both Google and frankly I would have been hestant to use in relation to it is a tool, because I use a learning management system in delivering my distance learning program, but they're talking with all sorts of new evolutions, including things like roster imports. You have to be on Workplace Education Plus to be able to get automatic setup of classes and keep rosters in sync with the student information system, and they use Clever to help power that. There are new add-ons that allow you to do interesting things inside of Google Classroom. These include familiar names like Edpuzzle and CK12 materials, Kahoot, Nearpod, Safari Montage, Adobe Spark for Education. And then also they're starting to put some advanced features that would be more LMS-y, including scheduling assignments across multiple classes. They're going to have offline capability, which I think is super interesting. I could tell you from my vantage point, that's sometimes hard to do if you have more nuanced assignments or have assignments that require the internet. Still interesting, however. And then also there is some new reporting available. This, you can see student engagement, so more tracking, which would be available in a traditional LMS. And I would say, I don't think it was Google's goal to create a learning management system when they created Classroom, and the first several iterations of it, it was a handy tool, but still quite short of a learning management system. But the bottom line is that I'm certain that COVID helped inspire them, in that I know a lot of teachers have very successfully delivered a full distance learning environment via Google Classroom, and it's interesting to see that. So, any thoughts about Google Classroom and its place in classrooms, Dr. Farr?
Oh, definitely. First, though, that article is awesome in that it has a sketch note at the top. I was just participating in a Texas online conference the last 2 days and caught some sketchnoting sessions. So it's just a great way to, have a summary of what they're doing. I agree that roster import is a pretty big deal. There's not the level of granularity with, module, activity tracking for what students have accessed and not conditional release. That was always something that was like a, advanced thing in higher ed, particularly, but just with more sophisticated courses, but it is a big thing for Google to make that claim. It's interesting that Classroom, at least this last year, wasn't officially part of G Suite. It fell under a different contract. But yet, I would say after Gmail, I don't know, Google Drive's key too, but Classroom is absolutely pivotally essential for a ton of schools. We talked about the Google conference that they had, I think it was back in February, where they talked about just the incredible number of users that had come online during the pandemic and the way that Google had scaled up for it. So as we've talked about on the show, Google is monetizing. It is not the free education show for everything. There's a lot that is still free. But there are these paid tiers, and there's some good reasons to look at doing that as an enterprise. And I don't have this in the notes, but Eric Kurtz, if you don't follow Eric, he is absolutely the most unbelievable Google knowledgeable educator. And there's a ton. There's a lot of folks that are just super knowledgeable, but he did a couple sessions at this, virtual Texas conference, and also Tony Vincent just is amazing. And he shared, I should put this in there, an infographic that shares the differences between slides and Google Drawings and Jamboard. And so anyway, one of the things I'll be working on next week as our faculty get back is just some kind of updates, what's new with Classroom, what's new with Google. And so I'll be drawing on this blog post and others. I don't think that some of these things like roster import are really going to affect us at this point, but who knows? And if that integrates with Clever, because I think this will be the first year we're going to use Clever as a rostering platform, for sure with Seesaw, and then I think with some other tools as well. So thankfully, I'm actually not in the mix of implementing that. But
Congratulations, Dr. Fryer.
Yeah, it's nice to have those things pass on to others. But really great to see these capabilities increasing, and it is absolutely a big deal to have Google use the term learning management system with Classroom, because they've never done that since the beginning. And I've done lots of sessions about Google Classroom, Seesaw, these other things, and one of the first things we'd say is it's not a true LMS. Well, we could still argue that, I guess, but Google's using the terms.
Yeah, it's certainly getting there, I would say.
Yeah, and Peggy's echoing in the chat room. Hello, Peggy. That Eric Kurtz's presentations in that DLC conference were really fantastic. So, and yeah, the recordings are available for the entire room. And I don't know if they're going to break those up, separately, but anyway, it's just a Cypress Fairbanks, I think, is the school district. They have like 90 campuses, a huge Houston area district, but just a massive and well put together online conference with multiple YouTube live rooms and presenters coming in from around the country as well as their district over Zoom, and it was fantastic. It was really, really well done. So, and that's great to have folks summarize those kinds of things. Perhaps we serve in some of that capacity for you as well as we try to read stuff and summarize. And then how about this bricked Chrome OS device?
Sure. This article is from Ron Armadio at Ars Technica on July 22nd, but he reported, many outlets reported, that there was a bit of an outage on Chrome OS last week because Google had pushed out a bad update to Chrome OS, but as it turns out, it was just a single character that was off. That there was I believe it was a like one and symbol was the bad character, and it ended up bricking some devices. Luckily, it's pretty easy to restore a Chrome OS device, and they pushed out an update that made it work out. But there's two things for this. First, type things carefully when you're coding. Second, this is the second time this year that there had been a bad update pushed out. Even in the last month, there was one earlier that actually impacted one of my collection of Chromebooks that would cause it to the CPU to ramp up, and in some cases, if you had one that was cooled down by a fan, would kind of whiz the fan up and then slow it down to a crawl. So not great news for the Google, but luckily, again, worst case scenario, it pushes an update out, and then you have to power wash the Chromebook. But otherwise, it's in good shape.
I have been playing, by the way, with the new. In fact, I don't have it in this room. It's in the next room. But our new Dell Chromebooks with touchpads, and I will say I am pleasantly surprised with the stylus. I just ordered like a little $10 thing that's going to stick to it so I can slide it in. I think one of the hardest things this year is going to be keeping track of the stylus, but it's a relatively inexpensive stylus compared to like the Apple Pencil or whatever. But I've been pretty pleased with it. So I did some playing with Explain Everything, and I'm going to be doing a lot more of that in the weeks ahead. So what is your I know that we had the Kevin Toffel article. There is no one perfect Chromebook, just like you can't say, hey, what's the best car in the world? But what is your favorite Chromebook right now, just personally, that you have, and are you lusting for one? There's a two-part question.
I lust for Chromebooks regularly because I'm an idiot and I buy them. The one I like most right now is actually not one that I personally own. We have a couple deployed in my organization, but it's the HP Chromebook 13C. It's the latest version of the HP Chromebook, or kind of corporate Chromebook, and I think I saw them on sale for as low as $420 last week. It looks like a thinner MacBook Pro, maybe even a MacBook Air. It's aluminum and metal.
What's the number of it?
I think it's a 13C.
13C, okay.
But I think it's maybe not the best out there, in part because I mean, I do a ton of reviews or read a ton of reviews, but I don't necessarily get to use many of the Chromebooks itself. But I like that one. And then all of the ThinkPad Chromebooks, the ones from Lenovo, I think those are almost always really, really great pieces of equipment. And the one that that is probably my daily driver is the ThinkPad. I think it's a yoga Chromebook, but this was on mega clearance a couple months ago. But it's the first generation that has the super fast Ryzen chips in it, and it's ridiculously fast. It only has 8 gigs of RAM. That was what was on the clearance bin at Lenovo, so that's what I ended up getting. I would have preferred the one with 16 gigs of RAM. It sounds ridiculous on a Chromebook, but if you are a power user that uses lots of tabs, it doesn't make a difference. But the other thing I would tell you, and I keep saying I'm going to write a blog post about this, but my blog posting has been pretty thin as of late. Last week I have some computers in my home that run server kind of things. I have a media server at home, and I also have a network attached storage device that I run at home to hold archives and my now almost useless music collection and my rip DVD collection and stuff. But I bought this would have been a 6-year-old. This was a used 6-year-old Dell Optiplex. And you would recognize it if you saw it because it's the standard Optiplex from 5, 6, 7 years ago. It's the 9020 Optiplex 9020. These are literally ones that I could go to the state of Montana as a school and pick up free ones of. But this one was less than $100. It came with 16 gigs of RAM and a 256 SSD drive. Eventually, I went into a server, but I installed Cloud Ready on it just to see how fast it was. And I plugged it into my 4K monitor with my side monitor over here, and it's a wonderfully fast Chrome OS like device. And I would say that if you like Chrome OS and you want a desktop experience and you are okay with shopping on eBay or finding corporate refurbishers, or if you're a school and you have access to a state program like Montana State Surplus Program, you can put great Chrome OS style devices. I would even recommend, if you're at school, to buy the license from Neverware that makes Cloud Ready, the kind of installable version of Chrome OS. It's now owned by Google. That environment, I think, is just so great. And I know, even with the lack of Android apps, I still think that Cloud Ready, because the web is so functional, can be a really powerful and production-based platform. So off on a rabbit hole there, but nonetheless.
That's what we do. That's what we do best, ladies and gentlemen. We go down rabbit holes. So they're geeky ones. Well, where would you like to go? We got all the Google articles tonight. So hallelujah.
Well, let's actually, I have a story here. Let's talk about privacy. There was a very interesting article in the New York Times on July 26th. Aaron Wu reports that QR codes are probably here to stay. So the track and there's concerns about them. But the reason why this article piqued my interest is because I have to admit something. And this article kind of, I feel vindicated by this article just a little bit. But I used to hate QR codes, and people would use them all the time. Even people I really like and respect, like Dr. Fur, and I never really understood them because it seemed like such an epic pain in the butt to use them. Right? Like people had to download a special app, and they didn't really understand them. And I was like, just put a short link up for the love of all that's good. And people would put up, all these QR codes around their classroom for open house night. And, I'd see parents struggling with their phones. I was like, just it's not saving anyone any time. And then the pandemic came along, but I have to say that this article somewhat vindicated me, in part because the rollout in the United States was not nearly as smooth as it was almost everywhere else around the world, where QR codes are a huge deal. And then the other thing that's happened in the last 2 years is that the QR code reader is integrated into the iOS camera and Android camera, which I think changes the game completely, right? And so I am in the last 2 years have bought into QR codes. I think they're a very interesting way to quickly bridge the physical to the digital, and I think it's an extraordinary tool, especially since it's integrated directly in the camera. But this New York Times article talks about how you're going to a website when you click on that, and all these businesses are using QR codes, whether it's to share a menu or to provide an ordering interface or to pay, that then allows some extremely accurate tracking of people, because your browser is a treasure trove of personal information. And in the same way we've talked about 100 times over on this podcast, that when you're on the web, chances are you're being pretty significantly tracked. And so QR codes are probably going to stick around from now on, because they are so easy to use with modern day devices. But it comes with a risk. If you are ordering food at a taco joint, and there's no wait service, you just order the QR code and food is brought to you with that, that they could sniff your Facebook cookies, or they could sniff other advertising trackers, and you can be tracked in that way. Now, to be clear, low energy Bluetooth tracks you. There's lots of ways that they can track you. Last week you talked about the concern about cameras tracking you, right? So it's just another technology to do that. But when I read this article, I chuckled, because QR codes used to be kind of like a real ugh for me.
Well, I'm glad that they're going more mainstream. I mean, it's a good thing to go green, and we've just got a number of restaurants now that saving money with menus, and you just get the updated version. Hey, it's on your phone. Everyone's got a phone. What I would say is, let's watch Apple, and then Google might follow suit, because in the newest version of iOS, which is out for developers but not the general public, it has features basically to shut down mail tracking, the way that these little invisible pixels in your mail, and Google has that where you have to turn them on, and it's trying, but it's also, like, I don't know, able to create different email addresses out of your iCloud so that you can limit spam. And anyway, Apple continues to be really serious about privacy. So I'm glad that the journalists at the New York Times are raising awareness about this. I still think privacy is something, and just the whole, it's surveillance capitalism. It's the whole undergirding economic model of a lot of the free web, and that is that we trade our data for free services. That people do not, in my mind, understand and see the negative aspects of that to the degree that we all probably need to. Anyway, so, and we're at risk of going into the tech correction talking about that. But anyway, it's all related, because the impacts that giving that data away and allowing companies and individuals and foreign governments to be able to utilize that for all kinds of purposes, whether it's just a nice little ad, or whether it's like nefarious and sabotaging our whole society, and getting, as we'll probably talk about this article, 1 in 5 Americans to believe that, microchips are being implanted when they, if they would get the vaccine. I mean, so there's some really bad impacts to that, but I think most people are probably still just kind of saying, so what? Hey, look, I have the menu on my phone. They're not seeing those bigger impacts yet. We hear Congress talking about people being censored and conservatives being censored, but the privacy aspect of that is not really something that, and I don't know what it'll take. We had Cambridge Analytica, so we had the 2016 election. I don't know what it'll take, if it'll be possible for people to really, become ardent, passionate defenders of privacy. But thankfully, Apple is leading that charge, and given the choice, as we've seen with those statistics of like opt-in, opt-out of tracking, most people will say, oh no, I don't want you to track me, even though the apps and the websites beg, please, it's so important to us that we track you. Anyway, most people say, nope, you can't do that.
And then you have an article there that is certainly related.
Yeah. So this is a Recode article from July 21st. And the headline of the article is this outed priest story is a warning for everyone about the need for data privacy laws. And so um, there's been a lot of folks who've talked about the potential for this kind of thing. But there was a Catholic priest who evidently had used the location-based hookup app Grinder, and that data somehow got obtained by a group that then decided to publish that and embarrass him, and he ended up resigning. And so, data that you put into the web, the digital footprint that you and I leave, can have impacts on us. And especially when that data, which is what we're just talking about with privacy and things that are being gathered about us, when that data is up for sale, who's going to buy it? Who's going to get it? Or who's going to hack it and have access to it? So a number of tech blogs and podcasts have been talking about this. And, the Recode, this echoes a lot what we were just talking about as far as privacy. They say at the end, what can you do? You can advocate for privacy laws that forbid these practices. Contact your local and federal representatives. It talks about state level privacy laws in Virginia and Colorado. But the economy worth millions of billions of dollars, is riding upon this, and so it's a huge part of the economy today, and is not something that's probably going to change quickly. But this could be a digital citizenship conversation. It certainly could be a conversation with fellow teachers and adults. It could be with students as well. There's a lot of issues about sexuality and things like that depending on your context, kids may not be developmentally ready for that, or that could be something, controversial to talk about. We have a lot of that going on right now, actually. But I thought that was a headline worth mentioning.
Absolutely. Well, let me do a couple of quick other kind of techie articles. Quick Apple article. This is from CNET in July 25th. It's funny because I even though I happen to be on the Apple side of the world right now, what I will absolutely admit is that Apple and Android, iOS and Android copy each other, and most of the features in one almost always appear in the other. So one of an example of something is that Android has a very easy method to change icons. So you can add icon packs on Android and completely change the look of your phone. And there is a bit of a cottage industry around the world for people that will sell you theme packs. And, a lot of people take a lot of pride in making their phones look interesting and artistic or funky. And so in iOS 14.7, you can change app icons, and it's a little funky because it involves the widgets feature, which another one that was kind of adopted from the Android world. And my understanding is it also doesn't allow you to put app badges on there. So if you utilize that to give you data like the number of unread messages or emails, and that's gone. But you can slowly and surely see some further adaptation as Apple kind of loosens the grip a bit on the iOS operating system.
What is the status with your watch and everything? But Shelly, my wife, just actually got a new Apple Watch 6 for her birthday. So
I love mine. It's been I would say I wear it 99 days out of 100. The health features are absolutely extraordinary, and what's likely to keep me in the iOS sphere, at least for phone and watch, is the health stuff. Yes, sleep tracking is part of it a little bit, but I could get that with Fitbit. Yes, I can see my blood sugar on there, and my blood sugar is currently 94. So that's super nice. But the bottom line is that the health apps, the health app itself on iOS that plugs into all my different health pieces and can put together data. Like for example, I'm starting to after 2 years of hip pain, now that I have an artificial hip, I'm getting to the point of which I can start taking my evening strolls again, and I hope to start on my more aggressive morning and noontime walking schedule. And I'm getting more exercise than I was 6 to 8 weeks ago. And, one app is talking to another app. The sleep app is talking to my exercise app. And it says, hey, as it turns out, when you get X amount of exercise during the day, you increase by 27 sleep points or that sort of thing. And I find that data to be invaluable. I do switching.
My wife is doing really well and really enjoying a diet and eating plan that she started this summer. And she's also started to, log measurements and statistics and doing some of those in her phone. And, there's some great stuff that Apple is doing, and it's hard to argue about advocacy for privacy rights, as important as privacy is in terms of the relationship to all of the rights that we enjoy, and health, fitness, and wellness, like so important, so key, and that's a conversation that I think I think we're seeing, more of, for instance, at educational technology conferences, and sometimes it's in the context of digital citizenship, but just, self-care and wellness, and having data and being able to see where you're going and identify patterns and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty exceptional. I don't know, and maybe you have some ideas about this, Jason. Like, when is that? Is that going to have any kind of impact on public schools? I think the Apple Watches are so expensive. It's hard to get a device in the hands of kids like a Chromebook, much less, maybe it, colleges or private schools, but I don't know. You can't really just, I've never heard of everyone saying, okay, for this PE class, everyone's got to have an Apple Watch, So it seems like the educational impact of that, unless there's going to be companies that are going to, come out with something that is much more affordable. The Chromebook for the watch. I don't know. I don't see that, impacting education as far as like what's required. But certainly, if your students have smartwatches, I know this poses interesting challenges in terms of wireless networks, right? How many Wi-Fi connected devices are we walking around with, and people are walking into rooms with? But that part of it seems to be much more of a personal impact, and impacting teachers at a personal level rather than impacting the classroom. So.
Well, and I'll tell you, as a program that runs a distance learning PE program, easily the most controversial and hard to explain thing we do, a lot of people want to make it about devices, and it's not a terrible idea, right? There's so much data you can track with devices that can help, provide accountability or affirmation that students are doing a self-reported exercise, but there still is a gap there, right? And I know a lot of great PE programs that use step trackers and pedometers and heart rate monitors and in room provided technology, and that's the BYOB, or I'm sorry, the BYOD part of this equation. Still has huge manifestations of digital divide. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot there. But not everyone can, like as you very correctly say, not everyone can afford a $400 or $500 Apple Watch, even if it provides extraordinary advantage.
It will be interesting as we continue to go further down the road, especially as long as Apple devices are working great. This is my Apple Watch 3, and I know that I'd be able to get EKG and fancier tracking and all that stuff, but until it breaks, there's no more updates or whatnot. I think I'll probably stick with it. So, all right, well, let's talk a little social media and media literacy. These actually can all be kind of tied together, but I'll go to the media literacy category at the top. And I don't think we mentioned this one last week, but this was from July 17th, and this is from The Guardian. The majority of COVID misinformation came from 12 people, report finds. I think we talked about last week, the United States Surgeon General, President Biden. There's a number of folks who are really, really, talking in very critical terms about misinformation, especially as they apply to the vaccines, the ways in which we're being harmed as a society. And it's not in the show notes, but the CDC just changed their guidelines for schools yesterday, right? I saw that headline in the Washington Post today that they're recommending everyone over age 2, in schools wear masks, which really has some people in our house bummed out. But this was an article that studied disinformation across the entire web. And so the vast majority of COVID-19 anti-vax misinformation conspiracy theories originated from just 12 people. And they're called the Disinformation Dozen. There's a pseudoscience physician, a bodybuilder, a wellness blogger, a religious zealot, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nephew of John F. Kennedy. Some of these folks have been deplatformed on certain platforms, but not others. I mean, let's just say it is unfortunate, it's hard to talk about controversial topics today in schools. Oh my gosh. But this would be a great topic if your situation and context is supportive and appropriate. I mean, what a rich article itself to analyze and look at, because of all the things that this touches to and ties to, issues of free speech and what, can companies do? What should they do? What should the limits of free speech do? I mean, what are the impacts of society if we've got, so many people embracing conspiracy theories and believing things that are just flat wrong? It really has huge impacts. And I don't know, I've been turning over ideas for a blog post about how do we rebuild confidence in our institutions. I don't know how we do that. So your thoughts, Dr. Neifer, are you were you following any of the Disinformation Dozen, and did it come as a surprise to you at all?
No, about the sheer number. It just tells you how extraordinary the reach is of viral content, right? That for me is where it's not surprising me at all, based on how things run around. But the bottom line is that I'm not saying that folks that didn't have a lot of credibility didn't end up getting quoted in mainstream media sources 20, 30, 40 years ago. But the fact that information can be handed around as fact, and it gets credibility just because someone and perhaps trust shares it. I mean, it really does kind of turn sources of authority on its ear. And I'm with you. I don't know how we fix this, and I fear it may take much more drastic action than any of us are willing to advocate for or take. But I don't. It may ultimately be a civilization challenging problem, and I don't really know what to do about it either. I had seen this report earlier, the actual release of the report, because I believe this content was rather viral, so it went around, and I didn't see any one of these folks either, or I wasn't following any of these folks either. But reading some of the backstories of some of them, I'm not surprised by it. And and a lot of times they also are quite savvy about the ways they market themselves. Messaging is part of their power. I think that's a big part of this as well. So I'm a little discouraged by this, but I remain hopeful that we can figure out a way to resolve this and give people correct information so they can make good decisions for themselves and their families.
Yeah. Well, along those same lines, the New York Times published an article by Max Fisher on July 25th entitled "Disinformation for Hire, a Shadow Industry is Quietly Booming. Back alley firms meddle in elections and promote falsehoods on behalf of clients who can claim deniability, escalating our era of unreality." And I don't have it in the show notes tonight, but I have almost finished. There's this 6-part series called Q Into the Storm, which is about QAnon, that is on HBO Max. And I think after I watch the last one, I may cancel our subscription. But this episode 5 I was watching this last week, like this article, talking about how, all kinds of groups, governmental groups, governments acting against their own peoples in some cases in their own country, others like, countering their enemies. We are literally continuing to have the effects of a massive psychological operation, a psyop, which, yes, Russia and China, and then other entities, state actors, non-state actors, domestic political groups, all kinds of different folks have been involved in, and it ties to surveillance capitalism and the way that our data is for sale and the ways that people can be targeted. But this idea of being able to flood the channel with disinformation. I've had several conversations in the last couple of weeks. One of them was just last night with a friend whose 85-year-old mother, gets so hyped up and emotional with whatever Tucker Carlson has talked about the previous day. And he spends so much time researching and then helping her try and sort of walk back from the cliff. And it's just incredibly, incredibly challenging. And I think it's also going to pose challenges for us, again, in schools. Montana's a pretty conservative state. Oklahoma is as well. We've got the kinds of studies showing how many folks are really convinced of some different realities when it comes to things like vaccines, election results. It poses some real challenges to us. And I wonder how we're going to grapple with this, as teachers. I certainly continue to believe that we need to be focused on media literacy and critical thinking. And just as you said in the last little closing, Jason, helping people make good decisions for themselves and their families. I mean, that is what we need to be focusing on. But, we've got to also, we got to walk the line between, none of us probably want to be fired for our jobs. And anyway, it's crazy. So, this article is not saying something new. This stuff has been happening for quite a while, but the ways in which, it's global, and it's happening in so many different places, and there's so many different groups. It's really it's embedded within our society. And it's not just like, oh, this is an Oklahoma or US thing. It's happening all over the place.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, well, here's a couple social media ones that are just a little bit sort of quicker. The Clubhouse app, which honestly, this is a TechCrunch article from the 21st. I have not been on. I think I even deleted the Clubhouse app. I mentioned on the show weeks ago that, like, knowing it's bad to share your contacts, like, as soon as I got accepted, oh, look, I've got the invitation. Is it okay to share your contacts? Tap. I mean, I have a lot of contacts. So, anyway, you don't have to wait for an invitation now. So Clubhouse is open to everybody. Peggy is still, we have several live viewers. Any of you have experienced Clubhouse? I mean, it was a new thing to try. Have you been on Clubhouse, Jason? And,
I have, yeah.
With it?
My experience wasn't super great because 2 times I got into Clubhouse, and then twice I got a notification that this meeting, or that people were hanging out, and I jumped in, and it was a semi-private meeting. After, in one case, it was a professional development event the teachers were doing, and a friend of mine was in there. She said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I just got a notification saying that this topic was happening, and I like this topic." And then the same thing happened, and it was a post. It was an online TEDx event, and that they were doing an after party, and I jumped in, and it's a very interesting concept. I just.
You wouldn't think people would be having private little events on a public, anyway,
Yeah.
especially if you understand how that app works, right? Because if you've shared your contacts, then it's going to lure you by, giving you notification. If you've number one shared your contacts, which I think you have to in order to even join it and do it. I don't know that you could opt out. And then if you opt into the notification. So yeah, it's that is though an important thing to think about going back to the classroom. We're going to be Chromebook 100% for all grades 5 through 8. Granting access to your Google account. Installing an extension, making sure that something is not hedgy, and then making decisions about what it is you want to share. Those are all good conversations. Couple other fast ones. Twitter had done this thing called fleets, which is like, ephemeral content that's going to disappear, kind of like your Facebook story. And so TechCrunch reported on July 14th, they're shutting that down. There just hadn't been a lot of people using that. Interestingly, I think it was on a podcast, and I'm not going to remember which one. Maybe it was either, it could have been Clockwise or Twit. They were saying that Facebook is 10 times the size of Twitter. We talk about the power of Twitter and how much we like it, but they were saying that, in terms of the number of users and size and scale, and I don't know what that looks like money wise, but anyway, 10 times the size. Twitter for iOS has started to test a dislike button. 9 to 5 Mac reports on July 21st. And interestingly, you don't get to see the results as the person, who even shared the tweet or is looking at it. It's like anonymous information that Twitter is going to use somehow to, curate the feed in some way. But I don't know if no users can actually see the results, then that thing, it would seem like that's going to, reduce people's incentive to use that. And then did you put that Verge one in about the big overhaul of TweetDeck? Are you a TweetDeck user?
Well, I am an on-again, off-again TweetDeck user. I still think that despite the fact that the interface is, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that it's still a very useful piece. And in fact, I know a lot of very tech-savvy and social media-savvy journalists are big fans of TweetDeck because it allows you to create kind of a watchful eye and a lot of different Twitter stuff at once. I love TweetDeck at conferences. I've run social media for a couple of conferences before and utilized TweetDeck as kind of a master control to keep an eye on Twitter traffic and different hashtags and stuff. I took a brief look at the screenshots that they were showing, and we'll see. I mean, I hope that we just don't need them to create another web-based Twitter client. We need something that allows you to do kind of that nuanced look at multiple accounts, multiple searches at once. But yeah, I like TweetDeck. It's always been a critical part of my engagement. And again, it's pretty amazing at conferences.
Well, here is the last social media article we've got tonight. This one actually came from a July 9th podcast by Your Undivided Attention, which is the Center for Humane Technology. And if you remember that very popular fall documentary, The Social Dilemma, this was the group that was behind that. And so the title of that podcast, again from July 9th, was A Facebook Whistleblower. And the article that they referenced, which is going back to April 12th, is how Facebook let fake engagement distort global politics, a whistleblower's account. And so the interview is fantastic. I would go and listen to that interview for sure. But Sophie Zhang is the person who was at Facebook, interviewed in that podcast and featured in this article. Not a high-level coder or executive for Facebook, but had some really kind of incredible insights and discoveries, like, I better get the country right, but like the president of some countries, the main person who is doing all of their social media, also running a whole bunch of fake, pages and accounts. Yes, the president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was amassing large numbers of fake likes on content he posted to his 500,000 followers on Facebook. And the fake engagement stood out in part because of, IP addresses and tracking. And so anyway, whistleblower in this case, Sophie Zhang, had raised these issues with Facebook, and it's really interesting to hear about how there's a flat, or there has been a pretty flat organizational and reporting structure to Facebook. They talk about the military, where it was like almost a sergeant coming to a general officer and being able to report and talk. And usually those people just can't talk to each other. The chain of command gets in the way. But Facebook just has some really, really big problems, and we've been glimpsing them, and it's unfortunate that we have, many of us, and myself included, a love-hate relationship with Facebook, right? I mean, the benefits of Facebook are so great that it's not something that I want to give up and am planning to give up at this point. But how these kinds of situations, it shows how much power these coders have, because if it hadn't been Honduras and it had been somewhere else, if it was India or China or think just larger nations and a bigger strategic relationship with the United States, a low-level coder wouldn't have been making decisions like, yeah, we're going to deplatform this person, or take these pages offline or whatever. And so it is incredible how vitally important Facebook is, not only to communications here in the United States, but as we've talked about on the show, like Facebook is the internet for some people in some countries. And again, the power that coders have. And anyway, there's a lesson here on using your power for good and not for evil. But just were any of these coders prepared to make these kinds of calls? Like, these are just geopolitical calls that impact the information, in some cases disinformation, that is being shared / spewed by government officials. And I thought that was an outstanding podcast interview and article, and I had not heard about that before. So were you familiar with that case? And
no, I wasn't. Pretty interesting stuff. And in fact, I'm just thinking, I'm a little blown away just listening to you talk.
Yeah. Well, hey, on the good side, this is the magic of podcasts, right? I mean, in this time of disinformation and whatever, I mean, it just depends upon the channels that we subscribe to. And oftentimes I feel like I sort of am walking into the casino and spinning the roulette wheel, like, what should I listen to today? And I know Peggy's got, I think we all do have just a lot of podcasts in our podcatchers. And, there's no way I can ever consume a fraction of content there. But it's cool. You have your favorites and you try stuff out, and somebody says something and recommend. And anyway, it's a wonderful aspect of today's media landscape. And if anybody out there, you're listening to a podcast, so you're probably a podcast listener. Maybe you're watching this on YouTube or just seeing it live on Facebook. But podcasting and being able to have access to different voices and have these long form interviews, and it's such a wonderful medium that enriches my life. So that article was one example.
I will also tell you that I also believe it is probably the most vastly untapped resource for classroom content too. And I presented a couple conference sessions in this a couple of years ago. I'm strongly considering adding this back to my regular conference presentation list, in part because, there's a lot of kind of GarageBand podcasts I would characterize in the most charming way. The EdTech Situation Room is a GarageBand podcast, we're a couple of guys that get together on Wednesday nights, and we have a pretty niche audience. We do have an audience though, and we talk to our audience. I mean, I get stopped at conferences, so that's part of that. But I'm not necessarily talking about the kind of more long tail aimed, smaller niche podcasts, but there are probably tens of thousands of commercially produced podcasts that have some application somewhere in your classroom. And if I were still in the history, political science, and geography classroom, as I used to be, there's no doubt in my mind I would be utilizing commercially produced, well, actually not commercially produced podcast as a content resource, because they're just amazing. They're storytelling mixed with content. NPR produces outstanding podcast. Their work with the TED Radio Hour produces outstanding podcast. 99% Invisible is an example of a podcast that has regular applicability to social studies classrooms. There is a shocking amount of really great content out there that for a little bit of investment on your part to listen to it and maybe create some guided notes for kids. You could have kids listen to a 20-minute podcast, either in a flipped classroom model or in your classroom, and then have fodder for extraordinary discussion and debate.
And that triggers a thought and a reminder, and maybe this is something either my wife could do in 3rd grade or I can do with 5th and 6th grade, is if parents want to volunteer, yes, we can have you come sponsor the party or, come bring treats or, be a chaperone on the field trip, whatever. But how about, contributing to our Wakelet where we're curating some content that relates to this topic, because none of us have an unlimited amount of time. But yeah, that is true. I don't know. And if anybody knows someone out there that's doing that with parent volunteers, I think that would really, really be cool, right? To sort of crowdsource the discovery and aggregation of curriculum related, like podcasts specifically. I mean, it could be videos and other things too. But that's a great idea. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I can give a really specific example of this because I actually wrote a lesson plan on this that, and I'm a little shy to admit this, that's available for sale on Teachers Pay Teachers. But there's a really amazing podcast called Gravy from the Southern Foodway Alliance, and they're telling their taglines are telling stories about the New South, and they had a really fascinating podcast on prison food. And the reason why I was listening to this on a daily walk several months ago, and I immediately went to this notion that it's in an interesting way, because some people have sued, incarcerated folks have sued state prisons, federal prisons, for the food being inadequate and it violating your civil rights and the specific Bill of Rights ban of cruel and unusual punishments. And cruel and unusual punishments oftentimes gets mired in death penalty conversations in your classroom. You don't really want to go there, at least right away. One of the ways you could do that is to discuss, to go around the issue and discuss it from a much more I think accessible way. And so I heard this 20-minute podcast on the changing nature of cuisine in prisons. And I would have loved to utilize that in my government classroom when I was in a social studies classroom.
Well, you know what? We're talking about podcasts and the flexibility of them, and I think we may just need to go a few minutes over, because we will do Geeks of the Week. But I would love for you, if you don't want to wait till next time, to talk about this motherboard article on this hosting site. Do you want to do that, or do you want to?
Yeah, I do.
That's your food for thought one. So
yeah. So okay. So what happened was, this is from Motherboard, which is the tech site by Vice, Vice.com, and I laughed at this. It's not really a laughing matter because it's bad news, but there was a video sharing site, and it's not one of the well-known video sharing sites. Vid.me, I believe, was the name of the website, and it's a really common one with large mainstream news media sites use vid.me. It's a platform for hosting video if you don't want to use the YouTube. And the domain expired, and so someone picked up the domain, right, which is not uncommon when domains expire, especially ones that have a lot of traffic to them, and it was redirected to a hardcore porn site. And so I just and in fact, I wouldn't even, if you're sensitive at all to these topics, don't go to the article, right? Because the article itself, is not shy in describing, the kind of content that ended up. But, on the Intelligencer and on the Washington Post and on the Huffington Post, New York Times Magazine, and a host of other, pretty mainstream websites, instead of having, videos that were hosted by this, otherwise mainstream tool, it was showing off various that. So what I would say is that I'm a big advocate for balanced blocking of websites when you're filtering, and I realize it's a federal law, and it's hooked to a whole lot of funding and important things, and it's true of libraries and schools. Filters itself aren't going to really do a whole lot, because someday a domain could expire and suddenly a site that you trust is showing you content that you don't, that really shouldn't be there. So it's a cautionary tale, I think, that really no filters ever going to block content that we might all almost universally agree is unacceptable for people under the age of 18 to see. And, bad stuff happens.
Hey, and some, if you ever embedded content from VidMe on your website, the article says that basically any embed is redirecting to their homepage to that content. So yeah, if you've got a blog with posts up, you might check and make sure that's not affecting you. It also, yeah. So the web of 2021 is not the web of 1995.
Yep.
All right. Well, how about some Geeks of the Week? I'll go fast. I have 3. Google has an incredible tool called Paint with Music. They also have their Google Music Lab, but this is one of the tools that Eric Kurtz showed. It reminds me of Singing Fingers, which was an MIT Media Lab app that you could sing and touch your tablet and it would record, and then you could play it back. And anyway, really, really, creative and interesting. Tony Vincent had a fantastic session yesterday at the Texas Virtual Conference I was mentioning, called Digital Learning Activities with Google Drawings, and I've got that link in to his site, which is just fantastic. And then the last one is Twitter bookmarks. I guess they've been a thing for years. I didn't even know they existed. Has anybody else used Twitter bookmarks? When you go to the Twitter page, just look on the left side, it says bookmarks. I didn't even know that. So those are my Geeks of the Week.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that those existed either. So, and this was in addition to sharing that wonderful episode of the Gravy podcast, NCCE, the Northwest Council for Computer Education, their 2022 conference will be at the beginning of February 2022. At this point, all speed ahead towards a face-to-face conference, but they are now taking presentation proposals. It's a wonderful event. You come hang out with me. I believe that Dr. Fryer is going to try to make an appearance at the 2022 event. So you come hang out with me and Wes. Almost certainly we will do some kind of podcast event there, whether it's a meetup or it's a live broadcast of the podcast. It'll be super wonderful, whatever it is that we do. But if you got something to share, there's a link in our show notes this week to go and register to present at NCC 2022.
Awesome.
Well, Wes, where can we find you on the internet?
Hey, I just updated my homepage. So just go to wesfryer.com and you can click on Let's Connect and get all kinds of links. How about you?
I am best place to find me is Twitter, Tech Savvy Teach. I also have a webpage that is simple, but does have information about me, Neifert, NEIWFER.com. But Twitter is probably the best place to find me. But this thing here we do is the EdTech Situation Room. It is a once-a-week podcast where Wes and I go through and talk about technology and kind of shoot it through the educational lens. If you can't join us live, although we wish you would, just check out our Twitter feed, EdTech SR, to get links to our live Facebook and YouTube broadcast every week. And you can hang out with Peggy George in our chat room on YouTube. If you can't join us live, download us wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. We're available on every app that I've ever downloaded on an iOS or a Android device. You can also download episodes from our website, edtechsr.com, and there you can also check out every link we talk about every week. We appreciate you joining us. We are here on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central, sometime in the middle of the night UTC. But if you can't join us live, feel free to download and listen to us afterwards. We wish you a great week. Stay safe, stay savvy, and we'll see you next time here on the EdTech Situation Room. Good night.